Epilogue! Needless to say, Pearl was not very pleased about their little detour. They were more than 2 hours later than whenever they promised to be back, and it ended up meeting Pearl and Garnet halfway on the beach. The two had gone looking for them. Unikite unfused at that point, and Amethyst took the blame as Pearl fussed all around Stephen. "I thought we could trust you with this, Amethyst!" Pearl squawked, looking down her pointy nose at the runty courts in displeasure and anxiously checking Stephen over at the same time. "Why in the world were you two out for so long?" Peridot jumped forward to help, saying, She found me and Lapis. We were all watching him. Everything was under control. We carried him through the forest." Pearl's whole figure jumped in alarm. "Forest? You were out in the forest? Why?" Amethyst's timid stance stiffened, shrinking back with her head lowered in shame. Garnet was watching all of this happen, her lips pursed and her expression mostly unreadable behind her reflective visor. Stephen was pretty sure that she was watching him and trying to figure out, through her future vision, where they'd gone. Stephen didn't want Amethyst to get in trouble because of him, so he spoke up with, "We were going to Jasper's grave." Pearl instantly fell silent, staring down at him. And then she drew back slightly, still holding on to him, saying, "Oh." "Please don't be mad at Amethyst. It was my idea," Stephen added, his voice shivering. She took care of me really well. She did everything she was supposed to. This wasn't her fault, and I'm fine, and we're back now, so..." He trailed away hopefully, hearing Garnet sigh. She leaned down to him and said, "Stephen, you could have just asked us to take you. We would have let you." Stephen looked away from her guiltily. His head was swimming with haziness from how far he'd walked, and he didn't have a single drop of energy left to think of a response. He'd worn himself down to the core. Garnet seemed to sense that. She brushed a hand over his shoulder scales, and he couldn't stop himself from shuddering at the twinging fire in the muscles. His whole body was in a world of pain right now, and it didn't take much brain cells to know why. He knew that she was piecing together why he'd done this, and he couldn't do anything to hide it. "You don't have to punish yourself," Garnet told him. "You've suffered enough." "Exactly!" his gem huffed crossly in his head. "Look at us! How are we supposed to fight now?" "We don't have to fight at all," Stephen reminded it. His gem was, again, very angry about this. He could practically feel the trust levels falling as he desperately tried to keep them up with the reassurances that they were fine. Still, Stephen didn't believe her or his gem, but he didn't have the patience to argue. He just let the magenta permafusion scoop him up as Unikite had been doing before, curling his head against her chest as she carried him back to the beach house. Peridot said goodbye to Amethyst with a quick hug, and Pearl was silent most of the trip, sticking close to Stephen. Everything hurt. They made it back home before sundown and got him to eat something. He couldn't remember what it was, he was too tired to really focus anymore, but they insisted that he needed at least a little bit of his strength back. When his dad found out how far Stephen had traveled, he was upset too, but his worried scoldings were muffled in his ears as they settled him into bed. The last thing Stephen remembered before falling asleep was his dad's gentle hand brushing over his prickling back, wishing that he could tell him that he didn't have to do that. And now it was tomorrow, and he was back inside Miss Ragus's waiting room. His dad's hand was still on his back, but now they were both sitting up in seats. This morning went by like a drunken old man. Stephen had woken up late to the desperate need to use the bathroom, followed by a deep thirst and hunger that he had been too numb the previous day to detect. Stephen was twice as sore as he was used to being after what he'd done to his body yesterday. He tried not to look as bad in front of Amethyst because he knew that she would feel guilty for not carrying him the whole way, but it was difficult to act like he didn't have nails of fire hammered into every joint and muscle and bone that made up his sad sack of a body. His gem was really jumpy today because of his weakened state, not trusting anything around him and flaring up at the slightest nudges. Stephen was able to calm it eventually, but his gem seemed to be backing down more to just make Stephen happy rather than believing him for once. Still, that was better than yelling, so Stephen was going to take it. What was just as bad, or maybe even worse than his gem, was his family. And Stephen knew that it sounded mean to think that, but it was impossible to think any other way whenever they were smothering him like this. They had apparently decided that Stephen couldn't make a single decision for himself anymore, and would not let him go anywhere without all of them with him. Giving him a bath to wash off the filth from yesterday apparently required every crystal gem, and during breakfast Pearl had been practically spoon-feeding him. They carried him everywhere now, even down the stairs, even if it was just a few steps across his room. He couldn't remember a single moment when they weren't touching him somehow, and it made him so anxious and agitated that he felt like he wanted to scream at them. He tried not to, he really did, but he was being pushed to his limit at this point. And, to top all of it off, he still didn't get word from Connie. So the whole morning was awful. And now he was in therapy. He wanted that to be a good thing, but to be honest, he was just as nervous and pink as he was the first time. Stephen glared down at his clawed hands, the bits of skin in between the scales humming the shining pink shade. He hadn't really fixed all this glowing stuff, just put off. In conclusion, he didn't particularly feel like he was on the road to betterness. What was he gonna do if he walked in and she saw that he was still glowing pink? What if she loses faith in him? Shouldn't an entire week be enough time to heal one problem? If Miss Ragus thought that he couldn't do this, he knew that he couldn't. She was gonna be so disappointed. Stephen scratched at his pink arm shamefully, closing his eyes and prodding at his gem's resolve experimentally. Please, just for 50 minutes, he thought to it. I promise nothing will happen to us. We're safe with Miss Ragus. Yes, because it's totally impossible for someone to turn on us whenever we've known them for an hour. His gem would have rolled its eyes if it could, and Stephen seethed over the hissy tone that it was taking with him. Still, he knew where it was coming from. Bismuth, lapis, peridot, white diamond, eyeball, jasper, topaz, Ronaldo. All of them had known him for longer than 50 minutes before attacking him somehow. Even though most of them were his friends now, that didn't mean that they didn't try to kill him after being peaceful. This is her job. She has no reason to attack us. That wouldn't make any sense. You're not making any sense. You're not making any sense, his gem retorted in his head. Why did you weaken us? This hurts a lot. Because we deserve to... And why are you so scared of her if she's not dangerous? His gem cut him off. Why do you hate me if all I want is to protect you? None of your emotions are logical. Stephen sighed, internally and externally, drumming his claws against his knees, his foot tapping away below him. Look, he thought to it, I'm only scared because I'm apparently screwed in the head. Miss Ragus is trying to help me fix it. If you want me to feel better, you need to help me fix it too. Then we can all be happy, right? His gem still, infuriatingly, didn't believe him. But it released a bit of its hold, and the glow died a few degrees. It didn't go away, still making him hum with an alien hue, but it wasn't preparing an immediate attack. Stephen tried to just focus on his dad instead. He wanted to lean against him just to feel more comforted, but he didn't want to poke him with his spikes. He tried to settle for drawing in some sort of strength from where his father's hand was carefully rubbing his scaly back, but he only wanted to crumble down like a child even more from the contact. It was fine. He was supposed to be fine. He had to be fine. The door opened. Stephen jumped and his gem shot up to attention again, startling the patient who was exiting. Stephen immediately looked down again, as if the carpet had the most fascinating pattern he'd ever seen before. It was the same patient from before, so they already knew not to look surprised at his appearance, but as Stephen listened to them leave from his view of the floor, he knew that they were eyeing him nervously. When they left, Stephen still didn't relax. He didn't move at all, knowing that his turn was coming soon, until the door opened again and Miss Ragus's dark-haired head poked out. Stephen forced his gaze up to meet hers, knowing fully well that she was seeing the blaring pink light that made up his skin, seeing how he was failing even before they began. He was frozen there, caught in the act. Still, if she was bothered by this, she didn't show it. Miss Ragus smiled kindly at him and said in a sweet voice, I'm ready for you. Come in, Stephen. Stephen tried to say something, but it came out as a weird combination of a wheeze and a cough. He bit his tongue and stood up gingerly, looking back to his dad, who nodded him along. Stephen took in a breath and followed Miss Ragus as she turned to walk down the hall. He wanted to tell her sorry as soon as possible, but it would be weird to say something whenever they hadn't even sat down yet. What was she thinking? Was she angry? She didn't look angry, but Stephen knew from personal experience that someone could be angry without looking it. What if she was frustrated? What if she had decided that he was an impossible case? It had been a whole week. He should be better by now, at least a little bit. But instead, all he had to show for it was his gem thinking he's an idiot. Half of his thoughts were occupied by the flurried anxieties. The other half were storming with the pains that were racking his body. He was really trying to keep up with Miss Ragus, but it was like every limb was wrapped in white-hot barbed wire that was hooked through every fiber of his flesh. It kept on constricting, digging deeper and deeper with every movement, crackling with a dry, itching torture. Miss Ragus was slowing down with him, not seeming to be in a rush, but that had to mean that she knew that he was slower today, since she was making the conscious decision to wait. It was embarrassing, but he couldn't stop the muffled twists of gasps or whimpers that came with almost every step. He felt like he'd bite through his tongue if he tried to stifle them further. He prayed that she wouldn't try to help, even though it seemed as if he was more likely to collapse here than make it to the sofa. Even though he knew that every part of the pain was a well-deserved punishment for what he'd done, that didn't stop it from hurting like hell. Out of some blessed miracle, Stephen found himself entering the room. He staggered halfway, with Miss Ragus reaching to steady him. He managed to catch himself and flop down onto the sofa, desperately trying to keep himself sitting upright, begging his lungs to stop wheezing so pitifully. He had no idea how he was going to do that same trip back again. Miss Ragus turned to close the door, and in the time that it took to do that, Stephen attempted to arrange himself into a more dignified position. But even when she got to her desk, he was probably still looking like he'd been blasted in the general direction of the couch by a geyser. His gem was growling like a tiger in his head, all of its focus on the lady in front of him as Stephen attempted to regain some form of strength. It didn't want her to move a muscle until Stephen recovered, and even in his weakened state, it was willing to pump every piece of life force that it had left into his protection. Please, just try to relax, Stephen thought to it. It's just a human. She's harmless, I promise. Miss Ragus is only here to help. He felt no response, but judging by the steady glow of his skin, he knew what his gem would have said. Just like before, Miss Ragus marked down a few notes on a clipboard before going silent again. Stephen found himself stuck in the same state of choked silence, not knowing where to start. What he wanted most was to apologize. The urge was building up too tight to keep down anymore. She must be so disappointed. He had to let her know that he didn't mean this. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then opened it again, before bursting out with, I'm sorry. He shuffled his limbs tighter around himself, feeling the fear trickle down his throat. He wished that the pink glow would just leave him alone. He was humiliated by it. About what? Miss Ragus asked. Stephen frowned, the shame feeling uncomfortably warm on his skin. Was she making him say it because she was angry at him and wanted him to admit it himself? He didn't want her to think that he hadn't wanted to get better. He still didn't look up at her as he explained. I'm still glowing, and I know I'm not supposed to be. I promise I've been trying to stop it, but my gem just still thinks you're trying to kill me, and... His words were getting faster as he fumbled to try and explain. I tried really hard, I really did, I promise, but I failed. I let you down, so just... He squeezed his claws together, fitting one pink blade between its neighbors and letting them grate past each other. He knew that he was rambling, he was just making it worse. I'm sorry, he finally finished. Please don't be mad. Miss Ragus didn't say anything at first as he anxiously waited for her response. When she did say something, it wasn't what he expected. It's all right, Stephen, I'm not mad. He snapped his head up in surprise and saw that the kind smile hadn't left her features. I'm not expecting you to get better in 1 week. That would be unrealistic, Miss Ragus shrugged. Your gem has the habits of an entire lifetime of fighting behind it. It won't be easily swayed. This is going to take time. Stephen, again, didn't know what to say. He felt a little relieved, some of the guilt lifted, but he was still mostly tangled in confusion. She didn't think that he could have gotten better that fast? Was that good or bad? How long would this take? How long before her patience ran out? He tried to just be glad that at least she wasn't frustrated at him. That would have been worse. Were you worried of my reaction this whole time? Miss Ragus asked, tilting her head in an attempt to understand. Stephen shuffled his scaly feet around, wondering if he'd done something wrong, before admitting, Yeah, kind of. What did you think I was going to do? Miss Ragus continued, neutral for now. All of the fears that Stephen had been feeling all morning suddenly rushed in again, filling his head with images of her patient expression suddenly twisting into fury, of her yelling or laughing or sighing in frustration and just walking out of the room. I don't know, get mad? Stephen swallowed anxiously. You'd start thinking I was a hopeless case and give up on me, and then I'd give up on me, and... Hold on, Stephen. Miss Ragus halted him with a raised hand. Think about it, logically. Would I really do that? That was a hard one. Stephen felt an uncertain disturbance flicker over those images, not as sure now. Maybe, he finally answered. Miss Ragus lowered her hand, giving him a gentle smile. I'll give you the truth on this one. I will never get mad at you and give up. He was surprised at that confirmation, trying to decipher whether it was honest or not. Are you sure? He asked. Of course, Miss Ragus replied simply. It's my job to work with you through this, no matter how tough it might seem. You didn't come here for me to start yelling at you. That would be quite counterproductive. Stephen carefully let the information sink in, trying to decide what it could mean. Suddenly, all of the worry that he'd been obsessing over seemed silly. This thought process, jumping to conclusions and thinking I'll be mad at you, isn't coming from you, Miss Ragus went on, holding up his attention. You struggle a lot with anxiety, and anxiety's specialty is doing things like that to your mind. She began to explain, carefully and clearly, as he listened. It likes to hold something important to you hostage, even though it doesn't have any real power unless if you give it some. In this case, it held your chances of getting better against you, and threatened that if I gave up, you would give up, even though I would never logically do something like that in the first place. Stephen could see it clearer now. He hadn't even realized before she said it that his thoughts were doing that. Why did he let them do that? It sounded so simple. Why was he falling for such easy tricks? I'm sorry, Stephen apologized, feeling stupid now. It's all right, no need to apologize. Miss Ragus waved him down. Anxiety is natural. It has evolved into our brains because, a long time ago, we used to actually need it to survive bad situations. For example, if a caveman heard a sound in the bushes and just assumed there was nothing, it would get eaten by a tiger. But if the caveman jumped to conclusions and decided that it was the worst-case scenario and ran away, it survived. She took a breath and drew them back down to reality. But this sort of thinking in a safe, modern situation just gets in the way. Nowadays, the anxiety has no tigers to warn us about, so instead it just latches onto other things. Stephen suddenly felt a drive to correct this rising up, so he asked quickly, how do I stop it then? Miss Ragus considered that and then said, well, there is no way to really stop anxiety. It's not meant to be stopped for good. It can be helpful in small amounts, such as the fear of getting hit by a car, meaning that you look both ways, or the fear of falling off of a cliff that keeps you away from the edge. But when anxiety starts to set off alarms about things that aren't really dangerous, that's when it's getting too much power. There's no stopping anxiety. The trick isn't to be fearless, but there is many ways to manage it better. Miss Ragus pushed that away, addressing the original concern. The first few steps is to learn how to recognize thinking traps and to know when and how to judge an anxious thought so you can decide if it's worth worrying about. He caught on to something that she said, repeating, thinking traps? She began to clarify, thinking traps are different ways that anxiety tricks us into thinking. She began to list them off. The most common ones are all or nothing, negative filtering, and jumping to conclusions. With all or nothing, you begin to think catastrophically that unless if you are perfect at something the first time, your whole life will be ruined, even though it's probably just an inconvenience. Negative filtering refers to how you take in what other people say. Let's say that all day people have been kind to you, but just because one person looks at you funny, you think that everyone hates you, and even though there's no real evidence for that. And jumping to conclusions is what you try to do pretty often, where you try and predict what will happen next or what people are thinking. You saw that you were still glowing, and you began to assume that would mean that I would get mad, even though that would be the last thing that I do. Stephen felt like her words were spotlights, suddenly casting many, many infectious thoughts into view. He hadn't even realized that maybe not all of those thoughts were true. But which ones were real and which ones weren't? He found himself asking that next. But how do I know which ones to get rid of? Miss Ragus explained simply, whenever you feel that you're worrying about something, stop and let yourself breathe. Move to a reasonable place in your mind where you'll only use the facts, not the what-ifs, as proof. Then, without assuming anything that's not a proven fact, judge the worry. You can think of reasons for and reasons against. You can think about the true likelihood of the worry coming true. But always remember, while you're putting the worry on trial, to not let the anxiety have a say. Just use the facts. She used their own situation as an example, saying, have I ever yelled at you or gotten frustrated with you before? He knew that this answer was easy, even though he felt strange admitting it. No. Do you really think that I will go against my literal job description and give up on you after one mistake? No, he said again. She nodded approvingly, confirming, you're right, I wouldn't. It would be incredibly naive for me to expect you to become perfect after 7 days, wouldn't it? Stephen blinked, finding himself to be nodding, agreeing. He felt himself relax, as if a huge weight had been moved off of him. Miss Ragus sketched down another note, smiling kindly. So do you think you can catch thinking traps? Stephen fiddled with his shirt, saying, I hope I can. It felt easy now, but without Miss Ragus, he knew that it might be harder next time. If you just relax and think logically, you will, Miss Ragus reassured him. There was an expanse of calm quiet now as Stephen rolled those thoughts over in his head. He saved the tool that she gave him in a place that it hopefully wouldn't be found by the anxiety, and began to move on with the conversation. Miss Ragus led with a question this time, pulling him away from those thoughts. Have you made any progress with your gem, or do you think that you need to find some other method? Stephen tried to reorient himself onto that new topic. He'd been so focused on what he was going to say to apologize, he hadn't even thought about what else they'd be talking about. He managed to say, reluctantly, I've kind of gotten it to listen to me, sometimes. I told it that it's the problem, and now it's trying to be a little bit more lenient on defenses, but I kind of think it's just doing it to make me stop screaming at it. He gestured to his glowing pink self and sighed. As you can see, it's not really backing down all the way. My gem just thinks I'm a whiny kid who complains too much. But you've been able to talk it down without fighting? She asked. Yeah, he confirmed, sinking down. But it's still not believing me. It has trust issues. No, this is a good thing, Stephen, Miss Ragus reassured him. He risked a glance up and saw that she was smiling in almost a prideful way. It's a step in the right direction. There's still a lot of steps, but this one is higher up than the last one. You've improved. He found his mouth wanting to match her smile. He guessed that he didn't think of it that way. Maybe this was a good thing. Had he really done better? So how have you been? Miss Ragus prompted further. Other than communicating with your gem, I mean. Are you settling well? Stephen shrugged. I guess. He cut himself off, trying to trail away as if it was uninteresting. What he wanted to complain about wasn't something that he should be complaining about. Still, it was too late, and Miss Ragus caught the bitten lip glance back to his feet. Tell me what's on your mind, she said calmly. I'm not here to judge you. Stephen waved his hand, trying to back down. No, it's okay. It's just going to sound really rude, and I know I have no right to say it. I'm sorry. Miss Ragus kept digging, insisting, whatever it is, you're allowed to say it to me, even if it is rude. Stephen couldn't help but open up. He planned to try and make it short, but his words kept on raising up and marching out of him like an army of the undead. So, my family is kind of smothering me. I know they think they're helping, but they won't leave me alone, he sighed, rubbing his arms. You know, this is the first time one of them hasn't been touching me for more than 5 minutes. They watch me all the time. They're trying to do everything for me. They won't even let me go to the bathroom on my own. He caught himself before he fell into a rant, shame flashing up again as he lowered his tone. I'm sorry. I know they mean well, and they just want to take care of me, and sometimes I actually do need their help, but... He sighed sadly, feeling annoyingly indecisive. This is just excessive. He was thinking that she was going to brush this off as being petty, but when she spoke, she was serious. That does sound like a problem. Have you confronted them about this? Caught off guard again, Stephen hurried to try and think over his response. Yeah, but it wasn't in the nicest way. His insides sank heavily. I keep snapping at them. I don't want them to think that they have to spend all this time with me. I don't want to be a burden on them, but it's like they're insisting to make me as big of a problem as possible. I just wish that they'd give me some space and just stop thinking they have to waste their life away taking care of me. Stephen paused, trying to keep his voice from wavering too much. He felt smaller than ever as he admitted, It makes me feel bad all over, and I can't stop myself from yelling at them, and I hate it, and I want to stop, but I don't know how. They won't listen to me unless if I scream. I don't know what to do about it. How do I stop from getting mad at them? Miss Ragus watched him, thinking to herself as if she was considering and then deciding on something. Before too much time passed, she said, Reacting to something angrily is a learned action, but it can be reversed with practice. It seems like you've learned that being loud and angry makes them go away, and since you want them to stop caring for you and to leave you alone, in the moments that it takes to yell at them, you're willing to trade that. Stephen winced guiltily. She continued, You're trying to destroy your relationships to keep them safe, but you have to trust them that they'll keep themselves safe. You need them. The next time you feel the urge to yell at them, try to stop and count backwards from 10 to give yourself time to think. Just be aware of this cycle. Even though they'll leave temporarily, all you'll do is distance yourself and push them away again. They're willing to help you, but if you make it look like they'll get their hands bitten off, they'll stop reaching for you. If you want them to be happy and safe, you need to take the time to compromise with them rather than going the easy way out and just forcing them to back off. Stephen took a moment to absorb that information, shifting his weight around the couch unhappily. He hadn't intended to do that to them, to make them feel unsafe. He promised himself that he'd try, saying aloud, "Okay, I'm sorry, I'll do that." "Now, all of this doesn't mean that they're not in the wrong too," Miss Ragus said quickly, holding up a hand to halt them. "Thinking that your support system is being too overbearing isn't as selfish as it sounds. It's very possible to smother someone until they're driven to doing what you were doing, with snapping at them. Do you think that will help in the long run?" "No," Stephen answered. "So what do you think you should do instead?" she pushed. He wrung his claws together, not liking the most obvious answer. I could talk to them about it." He shook away that sentence and squeaked, but I don't want to sound ungrateful. They're doing all these good things for me. I don't want them to think I'm just finding new reasons to complain." "Stephen, remember, you need to trust them," Miss Ragus reminded him gently. "They love you, and they'd want to know if they were making you uncomfortable. Would they really do this to you on purpose?" "No," he decided. "No, they wouldn't." "So to help this whole situation, what should you do?" She watched him expectantly. "I'll talk to them about it," he said after a long hesitation. "Talk, not yell," he clarified. "That sounds good," Miss Ragus smiled. He wasn't sure if he should say anything else, so instead he just waited for her. He glanced over to the clock on the wall and saw that they still had over 10 minutes until their time was up. The silence was gaping, and even though Miss Ragus didn't seem bothered by it, occupied for now by a few more jotted-down notes, Stephen was deeply aware of its presence. He felt like he had something else to say. And then he remembered what Amethyst had scolded him about yesterday. "But you've been punished enough already, whether you believe me or not. You should really talk to Miss Ragus about this tomorrow. This whole fair punishment thing is going too far." He felt a prickle go up his arms that he couldn't quite identify. On one hand, he didn't think that he was going too far on it at all. If anything, he wasn't going far enough. But if Amethyst was concerned enough to confront him about it, shouldn't he do it just for her sake? To at least make sure that she felt better. Wasn't he supposed to tell her about things like that? He still didn't want to. But he at least wanted to get Amethyst's problem done with. So Stephen spoke up whenever she put her pencil down, clearing his throat. There was something that Amethyst told me the other day. She told me to tell you this, so I just want her to not worry about it anymore." Miss Ragus nodded, listening. "Go ahead." Stephen sighed deeply. He tried to remind himself that she was here to help, confessing, "I'm having problems with guilt about what I did to everyone. I want to go help fix it, but I can't. I know I already healed everyone, but that's not enough. I want to go help with the construction somehow, or something, but for some reason the gems keep telling me I can't. I don't understand why. It's only fair, and I can do it. I deserve the pain anyway." Miss Ragus was watching him intensely now. Not aggressively, but very attentively. "And yesterday, I kind of went too far on this?" He raised up his paws, talons splayed out. Well, they think I went too far. I don't, I promise, I don't think I don't deserve this. It's completely fair, but the others were worried, so..." "What did you do?" Miss Ragus asked, a concerned tilt to her brow. "I asked to go on a walk," he said slowly. "They made Amethyst come with me, and we walked all the way down the beach. We didn't go into the city, of course. I'm not allowed, but we went over to the forest, and I convinced Amethyst to let me go see..." He felt his whole sentence drop out from underneath him, the quills of his back tightening. He knew that she'd already been told about that, but it still felt so wrong to say it out loud. He found himself taking almost a full 15 seconds to regain his voice. "Jasper's grave," he finally said, all in one breath. "The gem I shattered." Miss Ragus's expression twitched slightly. He waited for something to happen, and then realized that she was still focused on taking in his story. He lowered his head and continued, "I mean, you could probably tell already, but I'm very sore today. The others keep on acting like that's a super bad thing, but I don't think it is." He felt a strange cold clench in his chest as he mumbled on without really realizing that he was still speaking. "It feels good." He straightened up, realizing what he said, nervously tapping his claws to the scales on his knees. too specific. He tried to cover up his slip, stammering, I mean, if I can't help, I might as well get some other form of punishment. No big deal, nothing too over the top, just little stuff like that. That whole phrase sounded odd in his ears. He prayed that it didn't sound odd to Miss Ragus. He looked up at her again, not sure what he looked like to her. Miss Ragus's dark eyes were wrinkling with suspicious concerns, and he felt something wince away in him. His scaly arms folded across each other. And then she asked, no more hesitation, Stephen, have you been harming yourself in other ways? Stephen felt alarms raise in him. No, he said quickly. No, of course not. But you've been intentionally making your scars hurt? She asked. Something in her concerned tone made him feel like it was wrong somehow. But he knew to be truthful. He trusted her. And if something was wrong, she was supposed to fix it, right? Yes, Stephen confessed. Miss Ragus processed that, alert and fixated on him as she began with utmost care. Stephen, I mean this in the gentlest way possible. You can't keep trying to cause yourself pain. And yes, just because you didn't draw blood doesn't mean it's okay. Wearing your body out purposely so your scars hurt counts. Stephen grimaced guiltily, needles in his feet. He hadn't thought of it that way. Her tone was even and concrete as she continued, harming yourself is a very unhealthy coping mechanism, and I know that it sounds like it will help, but I can assure you it leads to nothing but more suffering. There has not been a single person who has found peace with themselves by hurting themselves. He felt waves of heated shame washing up his back. He knew that Miss Ragus was right, but he wanted so desperately to keep the thing that she was taking away from him. Butterflies bit at him, all of his faults gaping even wider, with nothing to fix them. He felt the words raking up his throat, explaining a concept that he couldn't let go of. But what else am I supposed to do? I can't help fix it. They won't let me. I have to fix it. I can't stand feeling so guilty all the time. It's killing me. He began to spill out all of his evils, his voice trembling miserably in remorse and tripping over each other in their rush to get to her ears. I murdered Jasper. I dragged Connie into my corruption. I wrecked half of Beach City. I hurt so many people. I almost got them all killed. And I just got away with it. Why does nobody care? Why don't they see why I need to do this? His claws were digging into his scalp, trying to wrench out a solution, the urging, infectious need to fix it devouring him like a feral animal. Miss Ragus let the words hang in the air like a thick fog, her eyes calculating and searching upon him. Finally, she began, Stephen, all your life you were wired to fix problems. And it's good to feel bad about causing all of those things, but it's not good to take your punishment into your own hands. Because you are already being punished. He looked up at her, shining pink already, confused. Your punishment is coming in the form of the scars that your body took on, Miss Ragus explained. Every day you are put through a lot of horrible pain, all because you didn't let your family help you soon enough. He lowered his head, the guilt feeling heavier than ever in his chest. And you don't need any more punishment than that, Miss Ragus said, carefully pulling him up out of the guilt. If it were physically possible for you to go and help with the construction, I would have suggested for you to go help, since it would begin to release this need to fix it and show the others that you regret what you did. She shook her head. But it is not physically possible for you to do that, because you are suffering in a different way. And that's enough for now. She leaned forward, meeting his gaze attentively. Do you understand, Stephen? Stephen wasn't sure. Many things were battling for dominance now in his head, and every single one of them argued that they were the right decision, that they were right. I guess, Stephen curled his scaly arms close to him. Miss Ragus continued, reinforcing him with, if you feel the need for punishment, you can always ask for help instead. Ask your family what you could do. If your family knew that you were trying to cause yourself more pain, they would be very, very upset. Seeking more suffering will only slow down the process of getting better, no matter what the urges are telling you. Looking for more punishment is not the answer, Stephen. Please, trust me on this. Stephen did trust her. He trusted her more than he trusted himself. But why didn't she think that it was justice? Why did he think that it was? Something changed, arranged itself differently in his head, and he knew, all of a sudden, that she was right. Okay, Stephen nodded, giving in. I trust you. I won't do it anymore. Miss Ragus watched him for a few more moments, as if she were checking for his sincerity, and then, seeming to notice the regret in his eyes, she relaxed, leaning back and smiling. Good. Thank you, Stephen. But it wasn't good. He knew that, even though he didn't fully understand it, he had done something wrong. Even though it didn't hurt anybody else, for some reason, they didn't want him to do it. This was a step backwards. If she hadn't been disappointed before, she had to be now. He was a hopeless case. He was wasting her time. He was letting her down. Not just her. Everyone. I'm sorry. He was crackled and low, feeling as if a giant hand was squeezing him into a pulp. I'm a mess, he said, resting his forehead on his palms with his elbows on his knees. I promise I'm trying to clean it up. It's just so much. Miss Ragus agreed sadly. I know. Before he could feel any worse, she picked him back up with, but you're doing surprisingly well, if that makes you feel any better. He glimpsed up at her again from between his claws. Really? He said. Miss Ragus was smiling with another dip to her head. Many patients of mine lack your kind core. You're at least already built on someone mature and sensible who has a concept of empathy. If you didn't have that, all these little lessons would take weeks or even months to build up. You're aware of your faults and willing to change. She tilted her head slightly, telling him sincerely, You're not as villainous as you think you are. He never knew how relieved he'd feel from hearing that. Well, not relieved. Relieved would mean that he believed her instantly. But he felt little sparkles of joy simmering up inside of him. Did she really think that? A new calmness swept through him, and he realized the glow had drained back to the source in his middle. No more pink. He felt the beginnings of a grin on his face. And then... Stupid. Even with your head start, you'll always end up in last. Fear crinkled away from that, beginning to obliterate what she had said almost instantly, the worry filling in the gaps. What if she was wrong? What if she was just saying that to make him feel better? What if... No, wait. This is what she had been talking about before, the thinking trap. Catching it in the act, Stephen slowed down, feeling the whirlpool disturbed, reversed. Think about it. Logically. Miss Ragus told him that he wasn't evil. She hasn't ever lied before, and she knew what she was talking about. She was qualified to tell him right from wrong. He didn't believe her because he'd done a lot of bad things recently. A lot. But that didn't make him evil, did it? Miss Ragus said that it was good that he was willing to change. That was what made him good. Stephen felt the clenching worry unwind itself, just slightly. Even if it didn't seem like it now, she was probably right? He'd come this far, hasn't he? Stephen felt strange. But it was strange good, not strange bad. Miss Ragus thought that he wasn't evil, so he had to not be, right? Oh, we're out of time, Miss Ragus said, breaking him out of his thoughts as she checked a wristwatch. He coughed and shuffled himself around. He had almost forgotten that this wouldn't last long. She looked towards him and said, Remember, just take a moment to calm down if you want to yell. Tell your family they're being overbearing, and try to let go of the guilt. You don't need punishment. You've gone through enough already. Your family loves you and wants you to be better. You've been doing very well. Stephen nodded reluctantly. Just like before, he felt the need to grab onto this couch and curl up here forever seize him. Still, he tried to shake it off as Miss Ragus stood up, circling around her desk. He held onto the cushions, making himself stand up carefully, feeling light. He gently shook her hand with his paw and let her lead him out of the door again. All the way to the waiting room, Stephen tried to sort out the tangle that had gummed up his thoughts. It felt like it had been 1,000,000 years since the session had begun. He still felt a little shaken. But his dad was there, waiting for him as always. Miss Ragus took a minute to whisper something to Greg, and Stephen watched his dad's expression shift to alarm. So keep an eye on him, okay? Miss Ragus was finishing. Greg nodded quickly, determined. I will, thank you. Stephen knew that she must have warned his dad about him wanting to hurt himself. He tried to withstand his dad's worried eyes as they said goodbye and left to the car. Stephen's thoughts caught on something as his dad buckled his seatbelt for him, even though Stephen was fully capable of doing that himself. Tell your family they're being overbearing. He looked over to his dad in the rearview mirror as the car rumbled to life, forcing his words to speak themselves. Hey, Dad, I kinda need to talk to you. To everyone, actually.